Is being a billionaire immoral? Or in other words, is there a certain level at which wealth becomes evil? This idea is present in both the left and the right side of the political spectrum, with people on the left pointing at public billionaires like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates and saying they must be doing something super evil in order to amass that amount of wealth. While people on the right might point at hidden, shadowy figures, maybe controlling even more than billions, maybe trillions of dollars out of the public eye, shaping the world, pulling strings like a puppeteer. But either way, there is a discussion that is growing where more and more people believe that at a certain level, wealth becomes immoral. And so today, we're going to talk about this issue with nuance. There's not going to be a black and white yes or no answer because the topic is not that simple. I'm going to look at both sides in good faith, and we'll see that we have to dive a little bit deeper into things like rights, the definition of wealth, what is money, and responsibility. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Joe Brown. I'm a former stockbroker turned YouTuber who spent years advising the top 1% on how to manage their wealth. And after making enough money to leave that corporate world behind, I turned my attention to teaching regular people financial strategies that exist outside the mainstream, things you'd never hear from a typical stockbroker or financial advisor. But before all that, I actually planned to become a pastor, and my bachelor's degree is in Christian ministries. And I grew up in the church as well. And for any of you who grew up in the church like me, you know that there is a deep hatred of wealth within the American church. Most Christians believe that the Bible says that money is the root of evil, which it does not. And it is especially ironic considering the institutional American church would not exist without enough rich people who are all donating their extra money to keep the church buildings running. Now, for anybody who has never been a part of the American church, you might think that's crazy considering that many Christians in America are part of the political right, and you would think of them as capitalists or lovers of the free market. But there is a deeply held belief that at a certain point, wealth is wrong. But it doesn't stop there. If we move over to the other side of the political spectrum, to the extreme, we get socialism and communism, which both ideally would be removing wealth from the people who have it in today's society, or at least many of them. Socialists and communists advocate for a redistribution of the current wealth. And when you do that, you have to have somebody in charge of doing that redistribution, and a changing of who is in control of the wealth and of the production of wealth and the allocation of resources in an economy. One thing that most people do not consider, though, is that you do not actually eliminate inequality when you are looking at more socialist or more communist societies. Typically, you just change who controls the wealth or what behaviors you need to do in order to accumulate wealth. The wealth distribution in places like North Korea rivals, if not exceeds, many other more free places. Said another way, redistribution can never cause equality. It can only change who is at the top. But this brings up a more important question. What is wealth? Because many times in this discussion, people are conflating money and wealth. When they say somebody has $1 billion, they don't actually have 1 billion US dollars sitting in a bank account or in a mattress or in gold coins in a giant tower that they can dive into and swim in like Scrooge McDuck. So we'll answer what is wealth. First, we need to answer what is money. There are a bunch of different ways to answer this, and people have been discussing this topic for decades, if not centuries. And so we're only going to cover a small summary here, but essentially money is simply a claim on real wealth. For a thought experiment, imagine you have 1 trillion US dollars, actual printed 1 trillion US dollars, but it is locked in a vault on Mars and you can never access it. Well, you don't actually have that money and it doesn't actually change your life and it doesn't make your life any better. The only way that that money affects your life is if you are able to use it. And by using money, you are exchanging those dollars for something that you want. That might be food, that might be luxuries, that might be housing, that might be transportation. Who knows what it is, but you are exchanging that piece of paper, that claim on wealth, that money for real wealth. Now, if money is simply an IOU for real wealth or a claim on future wealth, the question is, how did you come into having that money in the first place? And outside of force, outside of theft, the only way to actually get your hands on money, which is a claim on wealth is to give somebody else wealth in the first place. If you give somebody else something that they want badly enough to voluntarily give you a claim on future wealth, then you are both better off. This can look like giving somebody your time. It can look like giving somebody a product, or it can look like giving somebody a warm, fuzzy feeling that they are doing good in the world. But the only way for you to get your hands on a future claim on wealth, in other words, money, is to give somebody else something that they want badly enough that they are willing to give you their claim on wealth for that thing. This means that when you are operating in a free market, which means out of voluntary exchange, and there's no force involved, that when you collect money, you are objectively making the world a better place. You are giving somebody something else that they want more than something they are giving up. And the only way that you would even do this in the first place is if you are better off because you would rather have that claim on future wealth than the thing you are giving up, which might be a product, might be your time, might be something else. And by participating in voluntary exchange like this, both parties become better off, which means there is a net wealth increase in the world. This is really easy to see from a barter example. If you have somebody who has a banana tree and somebody who has a strawberry bush, and one guy has a lot of bananas, the other guy has a lot of strawberries, they're gonna be pretty bummed because the one guy's gonna get tired of eating bananas, the other guy's gonna get tired of eating strawberries. But if they exchange some of their bananas and strawberries with each other, they are both better off. The same amount of bananas exist and the same amount of strawberries exist, but because now they both get to participate in eating a strawberry banana combination, they're both much better off than they were before. And the only reason we know that is because they voluntarily engaged in that exchange. The resources didn't change, but the exchange caused more wealth for both parties. And just because money is on one side of this transaction doesn't change the fact that net wealth is increasing. Because remember, money is a claim on future wealth. And as long as the exchange happens voluntarily, both parties are better off, which means more wealth is increased in the world on net. This also brings up the point that wealth itself is not zero sum, meaning it's not like the world has one pie of wealth that's constantly being divided up and redistributed. It's not like every time I gain wealth, that means somebody else is losing wealth. Just like we saw in the bananas and strawberries example, there was no change in resources, but both people were better off. And in fact, on a global basis, we've had the exact same amount of resources for all of human history. It's all a closed loop. It's one ecosystem. And yet, there is far more wealth today than there was 50 years ago, than there was 100 years ago, than there was 500 years ago. Go back all through time, up till today, the amount of wealth has grown. It has not just been redistributed, shaken around, because it is not zero sum. Wealth can be both created and destroyed. If you light your house on fire, you're going to destroy that wealth. If you spend years gathering lumber and melting down copper and getting plastic and mixing concrete and painting walls, you assemble resources that have existed since the beginning of time in a way that is accessible and usable as real wealth. Now you can sell that and you've created real wealth out of raw resources. And because wealth can be both created and destroyed, that means that one person having a larger amount of wealth than another does not necessarily mean that that wealth has come to them as a result of transfer or theft or force. It also does not mean that they are hoarding something that should belong to somebody else. Because wealth can be created, it is possible for 99% of people to get richer and 1% of people to get a lot richer because the total pool of wealth expands. Now, so far I've been talking about hypothetical examples in purely free markets, and you and I both know that is not the world that we live in, so we are going to discuss that. It's important to note how wealth and money work though, especially when you have about 1% of people owning the same amount of wealth as the next 99% combined. That kind of wealth distribution or inequality can seem unfair. But in order to do something about this, whether you want to try and redistribute the wealth or just have a wealth cap or wealth tax or something like that, you have to be able to draw the line somewhere. So my question is, why billionaires? And I think the answer is because there are only a couple thousand billionaires in the world. Billionaire has become a term that we use to denote somebody who has so much money that it just cannot be comprehended by the human mind. And I will add that that's what the word millionaire used to mean until all of the inflation caused there to be so many millionaires that having $1 million is not even rich anymore. Did you know that in the United States of America today, there are 22 million millionaires? I'm going to say that again. in the United States of America, there are 22 million millionaires. And that is why we don't draw the line in the United States at millionaire anymore for somebody who is rich. When people say tax the rich, they're not talking about millionaires. Many people who are saying that are millionaires themselves. Heck, just look at Congress. They're basically all part of the 1%. Actually, probably part of the top 0.1%. But the real question is, why would we draw the boundaries around just the United States? If we take a look at globally, you only need to have somewhere between $30,000 to $50,000 to be in the top 1% globally. So why would we not impose a wealth tax over $50,000 and distribute all of the rest of that money to people around the rest of the world? After all, nations and borders are just arbitrary lines that should not be enforced. But when it comes to wealth, suddenly you don't think people that are a different color or speak a different language or are in a different part of the world deserve the same amount of equality that you do. And I would suggest that most of the time the people that do not use this boundary globally as what counts as rich versus not is because it puts them in the rich crowd, which is why you almost never see people calling for redistribution if they are going to be included in the basket of people that is going to be redistributed away from. And mark my words, once people in Congress are billionaires, they're going to start saying tax the trillionaires. And yes, it's going to happen. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, if there were ever trillionaires, then we should absolutely get rid of them and we should tax them until they don't exist. But consider for me the hypothetical scenario of just turning everybody into a millionaire. Let's say the government decided today to take control of the printing press. They tell the Federal Reserve, we need you to print up $1 million and deposit it into every single United States citizen's bank account. That would overnight turn every single person into a millionaire. But you might remember what happened when they gave everybody a couple $1,000s in 2020. Prices went through the roof, shortages happened everywhere because when you give people money, remember what money is. It's a claim on wealth. So people will go turn it in for real wealth. They will exchange it and get something of real value. And if everybody has $1 million to do that with, suddenly there is no more wealth to be purchased, or the price of all of that wealth just adjusts upwards to take into account all the new claims on wealth that are floating around in the system. In other words, there's more money chasing the same amount of goods and services, which means that overnight, being a millionaire would just be another word for being in poverty. It would also mean that being a billionaire would be a relatively normal thing. And very quickly, wealth would trickle into the people who know how to produce wealth and who know how to do business. And trillionaires, probably even quadrillionaires, would emerge very quickly, which again shows that it's not the absolute amount of money that matters, and it's not about the wealth that matters. It's about the unfairness that people feel when they see somebody else who has significantly more than they do. So we've covered how somebody accumulates wealth in a free economy. Basically, you just have to give somebody else something they want badly enough to give you a claim on wealth for it, and you can take that and you can purchase real wealth with that, whether that's investments or consumption, which means that in a free market, the people who have the most wealth have also produced the most wealth for other people. But if we were to completely change the rules of the game and wealth and resources were redistributed equally and people were in charge of dictating who got control of resources, who was in charge of production, who had to do what in terms of their labor, you would see a very different group of people controlling and owning the wealth. You would see the bureaucrats, the politically well-connected, and ultimately the group of people with the largest and most powerful force. Because at the end of the day, the only way a system like that can exist is through force. By definition, actually, because it's the opposite of a free market in which everybody is just able to do whatever they please and all exchange happens voluntarily. In that system, the most wealth naturally accumulates to the people who produce the most wealth for others, which means that if you want it to be different than that, the only way you can accomplish that is through force to stop it from being what would happen through voluntary and free exchange. Again, top-down, centrally planned economies do not remove wealth inequality, they just change who's at the top. And because who is at the top is there through force, that form of wealth is illegitimate. At this point, I'm afraid that a lot of people watching this are thinking that I'm advocating for if you are rich, therefore you are moral, and that is not the case at all. You can absolutely accumulate wealth in a way that is immoral. True ownership of something is never evil, regardless of the amount. you own it. It is yours. It belongs to you. I worked, I saved, and I decided to exchange that money for real wealth for this shiny yellow coin. It would not matter whether this shiny metal coin was worth $1 or whether it was worth $1 trillion. I worked, I saved, I purchased. It is my property. It does belong to me, and that can never be immoral. There is no line in the sand you can draw an arbitrary amount that would make this immoral for me to own. However, if the way that I acquired this was by taking it through force from you, it does not matter what my intention was, and it does not matter what I go and do with it. My ownership of it is illegitimate and immoral. It also does not matter whether me and a whole group of people that call ourselves the government decided to come to your house and take this from you, and we even decide we're gonna give some of it to somebody else. Still doesn't matter. We took it by force, and you had no choice. It is illegitimate and immoral. We did not earn it. We did not work for it. We did not get it voluntarily from somebody who wanted to give it to us because they desired what we were giving to them more. It also means that if I turn around and give this to somebody who also works partly in a free market, it does not make this legitimate. And I think this is the real form of inequality that many people have an issue with. Because today we have a Frankenstein system of some free market where a lot of people are participating in a free market and you can get very wealthy, but if you have no competence, it's going to be very difficult for you to get ahead. But you also have another system that is kind of living as a parasite on the free market, sucking wealth away from it. And I'm talking about a lot of healthcare companies, large pharma, the military industrial complex, organizations who rely on fat under the table checks from the government. And these people can get fabulously wealthy as a result of this. And while that may look like free markets or might look like capitalism from the outside because there is a purchase or transaction happening, it doesn't matter. Today, many people have accumulated their wealth through government mandated regulations, monopolies, being connected to the right people, getting government contracts, and just outright corruption. And all of these are wrong. Whether you make $1,000 this way or you become a billionaire this way. Again, the amount doesn't matter. It's the way that you accumulate the wealth that matters. Theft is always immoral regardless of the destination, which leaves many people who have very little skill stuck in the free market and they can't use grift and corruption like some of these people can in order to get ahead and gain wealth. And that's when they get frustrated at the system because they look at themselves and they accurately assess there's no way, no matter how long I work, that I could ever amass $10 million, let alone $1 billion. Therefore, if I can't do it, there's no possible way that somebody else could have done it the right way. The only way somebody can get that much wealth is through immoral means. And while some people certainly have used and abused theft and force and government and corruption in order to amass their wealth, it is not necessary. My challenge to you would be to look inside yourself at your own lack of ability, your lack of skill to produce wealth. Your incompetence does not necessitate somebody else's immorality. And I'll give you a hint. You are probably never going to get rich in today's economy with a job. Even the highest paying jobs is going to be very difficult to ever get ahead. Outside of being in sales, you are almost certainly going to need to have some sort of self-employment, be a contractor, start a business, or have some sort of side hustle. Something where your income is not arbitrarily capped by a boss or a manager or an executive team. Something where your income is only limited by your skill at producing something that somebody else wants badly enough that they're voluntarily willing to give you money for. And the better you get at that, it is unbelievable how much money you can make and how short of a time it can take you. And remember, in the words of Naval Ravikant, if you secretly despise wealth, it will elude you. Deep down, you must actually want it and then actively pursue it. And it's much easier to do when you realize the truth that in a free market in which you are operating in, the only way for you to get wealthier is to make somebody else's life better. Your net worth then becomes a measuring stick for yourself on how much better you were able to make the world around you. And you and I should be vocal about that fact and not be silent and hide our wealth for fear that somebody else is going to come along and try and take it and call us evil. Thomas Sowell said, "I have never understood why it is considered greed to want to keep the money that I have earned, but not greed to want to take it from somebody else." And if you're unconvinced at this point and still think we should try and legislate away wealth, even at just the most extreme levels, bills, here's a cautionary tale about what happens every time the people try and do that. The income tax in the United States started in 1913. For all of US history outside of the Civil War, there was no income tax. And the way they were able to get it passed in 1913 was by telling people it is only a tax of 1% and it is only on the top 1%. It's only a tax on income that it applies to the richest of the rich, and we're only taking away 1%. That's how the income tax started. Now look at where we are, where pretty much every single American pays almost 50% of their money to the US government and to local governments in taxes. Beware the power wielded against your enemy, because it will soon be used against you. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.